Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Hey guys, on this week's episode, I am joined by Julian Fahrer. Julian is the co-founder and CEO of Apollo. Apollo is a platform that helps people discover and choose Bitcoin products based on real reviews from Bitcoiners and side-by-side comparisons. Apollo is also built on the Lightning Network, enabling people to earn Bitcoin for reviewing products and helping to educate the community. Check out heyapollo.com to learn the latest about exchanges, wallets, custody services, and more. Nothing on this podcast is financial advice. It is for educational and entertainment purposes only. With that, enjoy the show. All right, we are back on the Mike White Podcast. I'm here with Julian of Apollo, heyapollo.com. It is an awesome Bitcoin review site, and we'll learn more about it here as we hear Julian's story. But thanks for taking the time out of your busy day. I know Paul Krugman was spouting nonsense on Twitter, and you were having to keep him in check. So thanks for taking some time to do this podcast.
No, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. Really excited to chat and look forward to it.
Yeah, so I met you in Austin when you were at BitBlock Boom, and there at Pleb Lab. It's a cool place where all the software developers that are interested in Bitcoin can go do a common co-working space and just work together, get stuff done. And I met you there and learned about your story of, I've met a lot of entrepreneurs in the space, and your story is definitely very unique. So I'm excited to just start from the beginning of, you didn't grow up in the States. You're growing up in Australia. So I wanted to hear what Australia is like, and specifically too, what was the culture around money, and what did you have like entrepreneurial bug growing up?
Yeah, good questions. So to begin with, I'll say, I probably didn't have an entrepreneurial bug, I think, at least not. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders have stories about, running lemonade stands and stuff like that when they were kids. But that wasn't really me. Although I will say my brother and co-founder, Tom, he had a lot more of that earlier entrepreneurial bug and spirit than I did probably. But no, I mean, I came to it later in life, relatively, I guess, which we can talk about it after a bit of a detour in a much more establishment fiat type linear career path. So it was only through, I suppose, living a very non-entrepreneurial life for the first 25 years of my life that I realized that maybe there was something more for me out there. So that's that part. Now, I guess money in Australia, it's a really good question. How is it different? I think many things are different about Australia, but one thing that's not, this is a big thing, is I think we inherit so much culture from America, whether it's political news, analysis, opinions, popular culture, television, movies, increasingly sports. People in Australia follow American sports. I like to think of America, and I say this lovingly because I live here now for many reasons, but America is really the mothership, or at least it was for me growing up. Without ever, necessarily articulating it this way, I think in hindsight, what I can see is that Australia is, it's it's in the orbit of the United States. Obviously, it's an ally and connected in other ways, but just as a regular person growing up, you feel that you are in the orbit. And so what does that mean for money? It means, I think, we're aware of our status in the world relative to the United States and other bigger economies. Australians always like to talk about how far above its average, quote unquote, Australia bats when it comes to, economic indicators and performance of different kinds. But look, Australia is a largely resource export dominant economy. It's how Australia's made its money for a very long time. We have very valuable iron ore and other precious metals and materials that we dig out of the ground and sell it all over the world and make it. And it's been the cause of an enormous amount of prosperity in Australia. And so it's all something that you're keenly aware of growing up.
And so as a kid though, are you thinking about what you want to do? Do you want to go and to make a ton of money? Do you thinking about going to America? Are you just focused on sports, or like what were your interests?
My interests growing up were, well, not that focused, I would say. I was fortunate to have a great upbringing, so I went to a great school, and great high school, and then, without thinking too carefully about it, went off to university and studied economics of all things. So, got a crash course in, of course, Keynesian economics from various angles. And still at that time, I think I was interested in public policy. I was interested, to some degree in kind of the legal elements of economics, which is why I went off to law school afterwards. But it took me a while. I think it took me to get out into the real world, fending for myself, before I started to think about what that meant, what it would mean to provide for myself, and to excel. I think, for me, that the idea of like, well, what would it mean to be really ambitious? What would it be like to set a really ambitious target or targets for myself in my life and try and go after those? That it didn't really dawn on me that was even something I could think about until I had already kind of semi-consciously kind of stumbled into a career path that I wasn't that interested in or happy with. So it took me some time.
And I think that's very common, because I know from my personal experience going into college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I did engineering just because I heard a lot of people saying, oh, it will keep a lot of doors open. There's a lot of opportunities in engineering, but I really had no idea. And was it true? Is it true your dad is has a PhD in economics?
This is true. Yeah.
And so how much does that play in in your choices? And is that wrong? Like if there's a kid coming out of high school right now, doesn't know what to do, if they have family members that are, excelled in a field, is that a good idea to just kind of go where they're going as well?
Yeah. Look, it's a really good question. I think the short answer is no. I don't think that's a bad idea necessarily. For me, my father, who has been an economist, a practicing economist for his entire career, received a PhD in economics from a very prestigious Ivy League institution here in the United States, and funnily enough, spent a lot of time working in Australia's central bank too. That all had enormous influence on me, and my father. I mean, I think a lot of young men would say this, but he was and still is the smartest person I have known in my life, and I think it's an obvious touch point for a young man trying to make his way in the world to look to his father and say, well, hopefully in a perfect world, he's made some pretty good decisions and it's worked out pretty well. So in the absence yet of my own path, maybe I'll try and emulate that a little bit.
Awesome. So you're there and you finish your economics degree. Was that pretty smooth, or did you have any eye-opening moments there?
No, I had a lot of eye-closing moments, I would say. I didn't take too much away from it, other than probably a feeling of being left wanting more. There were some weird things going on in economics economics in an academic sense, in a global sense at the time. This is right around 2011, 2012. So the discipline of so-called behavioral economics had a lot of hype and a lot of steam. And I don't know, but I didn't really buy it. And and frankly, I wasn't good enough at math to do anything serious or take it any further. I kind of just got through my final econometrics course. Honestly, I don't even know how. I knew it was kind of the end of the road for me. I mean, it's even though we can joke about economics, and we probably should, there is a lot of math involved, and so
Yeah.
I respectfully bowed out when I realized that I had not much more to offer there.
But a lot of that math too. This is all secondhand experience from talking to people that actually studied economics. A lot of that math is based off of all these kind of macro type statistics and everything they kind of make up themselves. I don't know if you found that even super valuable. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give you one example of this is one thing that I do remember, and in hindsight, it's kind of hilarious. One of my big group projects that did involve a lot of math, not a lot of which I actually did, but in this final econometrics class, me and a couple of buddies, we, the task assigned to the group for the semester was like go away and come up with a model for explaining something in the out in the real world. I don't know that it was a lot more than that, but again, so at the time, it's 2011, it was when all the Arab Spring stuff was happening, and so we thought, hey, why don't we try and put together a model that would explain the likelihood of like civil unrest happening somewhere in a given country. And of course, in hindsight, this is like a hilarious thing to do, like classic economist, like thinking that you can fit the entire world in a model type.
There's an equation
type
for
thinking.
that.
And so
Yeah.
there's an equation for that, right? And we, pull out all the statistics from various NGOs about, freedom of press indexes and all these kinds of things. And so, now I can say that that kind of thing should probably be laughed out of any serious classroom. But the funny thing is we got like an excellent grade for it. And it ended up being the thing that kept my grade high enough so that I actually passed the course. So, so there you go. So no, but other than that, no, I realized that I didn't know what I wanted to do afterwards. I needed some more direction in life. I was ambitious. I wanted to do something more at that stage, but I didn't know what. And I kind of wanted to be told what to do, frankly. And so I did what a lot of other people do in those circumstances, and I went to law school and thought that would be the solution to my problems.
Was that a difficult process? Or I know here they have to take the LSAT and then apply, and it takes some time. Or how'd that go?
Yeah. I got into a really good school, fortunately, and yeah, I had to take the LSAT and do some other things. I can't remember if there was much more to it. Um, I'm glad that I did, although I will say I'm still carrying around some of the debt from that experience to this day. So,
Oh wow,
yes, the legacy lives on.
wow. So law school, I know in America it is super litigious, and there's a huge demand for lawyers because everyone's trying to cover their backs or go after the competition. Even like right now, you got freaking Google getting sued for antitrust. There's always some antitrust case going on. Did you know what role you wanted to play, or was it more just I know I don't want to do economics and I need some time?
Yeah, so I think by that point, I had started to develop some more intellectual interests of my own. I had started to do some more reading, frankly, about history and philosophy and other things. And so my I would say I was kind of in this what I see now is kind of Bitcoiner germinal state, where I think what interested me most, what I wanted to do actually was be a criminal defense lawyer,
Ah,
um, because I thought that it would be a noble thing to do to protect people from the state. Right?
yeah,
So that's I wouldn't say I had my heart set on it because I didn't pursue it that vigorously, but it's what I was interested in. It was the most interesting stuff to study. Criminal law, the interplay between an individual's personal freedoms and the state, and where are those boundaries? I found that one of the most fascinating things in my law school experience, and so that's what I wanted to do. I didn't turn out that way, but yeah, those are I guess my early interests.
So those early interests, you're showing that you have some sort of awareness of state overreach and protecting people and their rights. What can you attribute that to any certain influences or people or books or content?
Yeah, probably. At the time, I was reading a lot of, frankly, more like libertarian type voices. Like Christopher Hitchens was a massive influence on me in my early 20s. Um, and, so I was coming at the kind of, I would say, developing an awareness of state overreach, but more from that kind of liberal angle. And at the time, particularly in the culture wars, there was a lot going on with terrorism. Islamic terrorism, or what people assumed was Islamic terrorism, or the threat of, or the fear of, was back then like a much more ever-present part of daily life. And so all kinds of things were happening related to that, right? Like governments were deciding that they needed to pass through a variety of anti-terrorism laws that restricted civil liberties in all
Yeah.
kinds of ways. So that certainly was a big influence at the time. Not to say that I had rock solid views one way or another, but it was kind of the environment that I was developing this consciousness in, for sure.
And how long did it kind of take you from you're in law school, you go get a job, and you're working traditional role, traditional position, and you decide, oh, I'm moving to California, I'm gonna start a startup and just take a complete 180 and go way more on the risk curve and leave your kind of traditional cushy comfortable position.
Yeah, it didn't take long. So there was short term reason and long term reason. I would say, long term, I had for many years aspired to come to the United States, and the reasons for that are several. One of which is I'm a U.S. citizen by birth. I think I mentioned earlier that my parents were here for a little while Dad was doing a PhD. So I was born here. So I was lucky enough to get citizenship from birth. Pretty easy for me to get a passport after that, and so on. And so I had always known that it would be pretty straightforward for me to just get on a plane. If the circumstances were ever right, I could just get on a plane, come over here. Didn't need to ask for permission, and I could just try and figure it out. And so I knew that that was an enormous privilege. I always knew how much people were desperate to come to America, and not to say that I ever was, but I was aware that it was an opportunity and a privilege that I had that many people didn't, and so I wanted to take advantage of it. And as I was saying before, America is the mothership. Growing up, everything I watched, everything I read, was just almost either came from or was influenced by the United States. At law school, I studied U.S. constitutional law. I read about the Civil War and the Revolution, and I read biographies of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and all this stuff. So I was becoming steeped in the political history. I was very much steeped in the cultural present, and so all of that was a process developing over a long period of time. On the short-term side of things, the push factor was I went off to work in a law firm and basically hated it from day one, and knew that it wasn't going to be for me. It wasn't going to be how I wanted to live my life and spend my career. So, and we can talk more about why that is, but I think pretty straightforwardly, what I realized was, and again, the timing is important here, right? So it's 2016. All kinds of crazy stuff is happening in the world. You've got Brexit going on. You've got the election of Donald Trump.
Yep.
It was a pretty wild time. And so on the one hand, many things that I had thought were true about the world or had been told that was true were coming apart a little bit. I mean, I thought, hey, isn't this the end of history that we're living through? Aren't all the solutions to our problems solved, right? Is it, with some kind of technocratic, managerial, behavioral economics policies enacted from on down high, isn't everybody going to be happy and well-fed and contented? And and all I need to do is just like carve out a nice little patch for myself in that type of life. And what I was seeing was that no, in fact, like there are major problems in the world, and so that I saw that, and working, as a lawyer in a law firm just was completely disconnected from that. I mean, quite frankly, what it means to practice law, and this isn't a knock on the law, it just is how it is. What it means to practice law is you're essentially hindcasting and backward looking and working off of precedent from something somebody said 5 years ago or 50 years ago, right? And so this is completely disconnected from solving these emerging new novel problems. And so I think I just decided that I wanted to be somewhere and do something that was closer to the coalface and had something to do more with what was actually going on in the world today and could shape it in some way. So all of this was kind of stewing in my mind, and then moved over to San Francisco basically to get into tech, thanks in part to my kind of best friend, who ended up being my co-founder, my first company, who had been living over there for a while, basically called me over and said, like, this is the place to be. And I said, you know what, it is. The time's right. The stars are aligned. I'm going to get on that plane and get over there and make it happen.
That's awesome. And I love to see, I'm very heavily influenced by Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he talks about kind of finding your passion and doing something you love, but also something you're good at. And there's a balance. And like, what is that? It sounds like you found the perfect kind of ratio, but I don't know. At what point do you recommend people making that jump based on their like financial situation? Let's say, like if they spend all their money on the plane ticket, is that too low, or how much savings, or is there a number? I don't know.
I don't think there's a number. I think it's case by case. And, I knew that if I failed and if I struck out, then I could just come back home to Australia, and, my family was there and my parents were there. And so I knew, there was no amount of failure that would have been really dire for me, other than it would have been a little bit embarrassing. So, I, and I didn't have really any money myself. I had like a couple of suitcases worth of stuff. But again, I wouldn't really say it's about, the financial security. Some people would require more and some less. I think for me, it was just a no-brainer. It seemed like it really was the right thing to do. And, in a sense it was risky, but look, I don't know, maybe this sounds a little bit trite, but to me, the bigger risk would have been to not do it. Like the bigger risk would have been to just continue doing what I knew that I didn't want to do. And so once I'd framed it in those terms, it became quite straightforward, and I didn't feel like I was performing any risk calculations.
And did you get any pushback from either like friends or family, or were they pretty supportive?
No pushback from family. They were really supportive. I mean, they obviously, I think miss me, and in a perfect world, we'd be living in the same place today. But no, they're really supportive, really happy for me. Friends were too. I think, funnily enough, at the time, in Australia, particularly in 2016, to announce that you were late 2016, right, post-Trump election, to announce that you're going to go and move to America was, for some people, a fairly not scandalous, but a surprising move, right? Like there was this kind of stock response that I got from some people that was like, and again, and this is a bit of an Australian thing where there's a bit of a crude understanding of what the United States is, despite, as I said, being inundated with everything from the country all the time. Nonetheless, what people said to me was like, well, America, isn't that just like Trump, guns, religion, and no healthcare? Obviously the truth is yes and no. But no real pushback. People were supportive.
That's awesome. Yeah, America's huge. I'm sure Australia is the same way. You got the cities, you got the rural areas, and they're a ton of different people. So we got a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but talking about people too, how valuable was it when you're in San Francisco around those minds in tech and just being immersed with a bunch of sharp people? What was your takeaway from that?
I mean, it was enormous. And I didn't realize at all in advance how valuable that would be. Um, not just from being around a bunch of smart people working on hard problems. All of that in and of itself, you can just sponge up so much knowledge. But what I found was that the culture at the time was so alien to me in a good way. People were, and I know people like to knock tech and knock the Bay Area, but I think to really, to have experienced this is to really understand what makes Silicon Valley tick. Is that people are so generous. You know what I mean? I arrived off a plane with no reputation, no history, what I thought, like not a ton of value to add at the time, but people would take meetings, they would make intros, they would open up their network to me, and so this is to your point about kind of feeling the risk of it. I didn't because, it wasn't, I got job interviews, you know what I mean? And I met people and they had a friend who worked at a startup and I'm not sure if the culture is still like that to the same degree 6 years later. I hope that it is, but I found it to be a very welcoming place.
That's awesome. I think, like you said, the Bay Area gets a bad reputation because they think, oh, just woke and all that. But there is so much building and production going on from what Apple created up there. The whole Silicon Valley makes life
Absolutely
so much better. And
yeah.
so you were successful in making a startup, and you get acquired by, or you sell it to one of the largest VC firms in the country, and then you start working for them a little bit, it looks like. So how'd that happen?
Yeah. So the short version of the story is with myself, my mate and co-founder Dave and roommate, we started a recruiting company, kind of a little bootstrapped recruiting tech-enabled services thing. And long story short, we ended up getting acquired by Sequoia Capital to basically come in with us and our team to join their talent team. And so the talent team is one of several non-investor operational teams that Sequoia and many other VCs like Sequoia have that work with portfolio companies to help them build. So help them build their companies. And so the talent team was and is aimed at helping particularly early stage, or not just early stage companies, but recruit, find the best talent and win them and bring them into your company is what I think is almost the most important thing to succeed at. So the Sequoia, invested a lot in it and still does.
And what's your take on, I love VCs, like the way they operate compared to like traditional getting a bank loan, how they really focus. It seems like they're very interested in helping build the company and be on the cutting edge. Did you get the same vibe there?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. They're the best in the business. And again, this is me kind of having this weird, like, sideways lateral movement through the industry. I didn't even, I didn't know, I knew of their reputation, but not that much. And so, it was an amazing learning experience, an eye-opening thing to be in that institution. And they really are the best of the best, best investors in the country, in the world. And I learned a ton. And the degree to which they, as you said, are very material in shaping the success of founders and startups. It just can't really be overstated.
And if anyone has 5 minutes, just go to their website and just start scrolling down all the companies they've touched. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
impressive.
You can name it, right? It's Apple, PayPal, WhatsApp, DoorDash, Stripe, Airbnb. The list goes on.
So you have that amazing opportunity, and at some point you learn about Bitcoin. So what is it about this Bitcoin thing that piques your interest?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's even, it's not so easy to answer in hindsight because I've learned so much about it since. So it's hard to kind of cast your mind back to when you first come into contact with it. But, I first invested in Bitcoin in 2019, or took a serious interest in it in 2019. I'd say serious, like financially meaningful, but I didn't know what it was in 2019. And really what I knew about it was that it had the potential to go up in value a lot.
Yeah.
And I didn't know a ton more than that, right? Which is fine. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners come in contact with it in that way. But that's what I knew about it. And then it really took until March of 2020 when everything changed for me to start to go down the rabbit hole in a serious way and understand not just like what is the potential as an investment vehicle, but what is this network? What is this asset class? What can it do for the world? It kind of took, and it took me until then to begin on that path, and so that was the catalyst. Was 2020,
And that's just when the stimulus checks started going out, the market crashed. And then is March when Bitcoin pumped?
March is when it dumped.
Oh, it dumped. Okay.
March is when I think it touched 3,600. I could be wrong, 33 or 36. But March is when it dumped. But what even 2020 seems like a long time ago. But what did I realize? I realized that the governments all over the world were shutting down economies, paying people to stay home, manipulating the economy, both choking it to death and trying to stave off its death with artificial money printing at the same time. And, it was a radicalizing experience. And so I think, fortunately, I had already had some exposure to Bitcoin, and I had friends that did too. And in particular, my brother Tom, who was further down the rabbit hole than I was. We put two and two together relatively quickly, I would say, with a lot of other people in 2020 too.
Yeah, and so you're talking with your brother. You said going down the rabbit hole. So what would you recommend if someone's just hearing about Bitcoin now, of books or podcasts or things you really enjoyed?
Yeah. Well, so firstly, I'll give a shameless plug to Apollo, my company right now, because we're kind of solving a little bit of this problem right now, which is to help people find the right products to use, exchanges, wallets, and everything else, and compare them. But even earlier than that, I think you need to take an interest in Bitcoin. And so to the question of how to break the ice, how to start that conversation, well, everybody's different. For me, it was, I think, listening to the Saylor series, Robert Breedlove's What is Money series with Michael Saylor. That was instrumental. Reading the Bitcoin Standard was instrumental. Those two stand out for sure.
I think the Bitcoin Standard is the one consistent thing that's everyone said that I've asked that. So I think that is consensus is decided. That's definitely something you should find early on. So I want to go ahead and touch on Apollo right now, where you said you went down the rabbit hole. You're seeing all that's going on in the world. You see that Bitcoin can be like that life raft off of the fiat standard. And why do you decide to go create a Bitcoin company?
Sure. So I realized a couple of things in 2021. One was that Bitcoin was the only solution that I could see for so much of the madness and chaos in the world around me at the time. An escape hatch, not just on an individual level, but for society. And that it was a cause it was the only cause, the best cause that I could align myself with and try and contribute to in some way. And even more than that, really what I decided was it was what I wanted to dedicate my career to. And if I'm so fortunate, dedicate my life to. And I realized that. And then and I also realized that where I was at the time, I wasn't going to be able to do that full time. And that I had an opportunity, given what I had learned about startups, what I had, the connections I had made. I had an opportunity I felt to contribute in some way, and my co-founders did as well. And so, the problem that we really set ourselves to, not to solving, but just to making a dent on, was Bitcoin adoption. How, this question of how can we get as much Bitcoin into as many hands as possible, as fast as possible. And I still think that it's really, everything else is subordinate to that. So we decided to start a company together at the end of 2021 and set ourselves the task, first and foremost, of just talking to people, going out and talking to people about Bitcoin, and hearing what they had to say, seeing how they felt about it, judging their reactions, and learning about, and this is customer discovery 101, right? Like learning, is there a pain here to solve? And now, is there a pain that Bitcoin can solve too? So that's what we did. And what I learned was, well, people have very mixed reactions to Bitcoin, for one thing. But in the process of having these conversations and hosting some town halls and going to meetups and all this kind of thing, and talking to not Bitcoiners, but pre-coiners, or people who might be pre-coiners, and giving them the pitch, I mean, I can tell you the day that I decided, I should say we decided to take Apollo in this direction, was I had given this presentation about Bitcoin to a room full of people who didn't know anything about it. And it was the whole, like, from first principles, what is money, through, what is gold standard, what happened in 1971, and so on. And then Bitcoin is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Talked about Yapstones, talked about Richard Nixon, talked about everything. And it took a while, and it was, a lot of work to pull that off. And, having got through the end of that, a couple of people then, and in other conversations like it, had basically one follow-up question or type of follow-up question, which is a really simple question, which is, okay, I'm interested in Bitcoin. I'm curious. You've mentioned, I'm even maybe thinking about buying, and you've mentioned these things called exchanges and wallets, and, it all sounds very interesting to me. So, like, what's the Bitcoin homepage? Where can you send me now? Where should I go to go and do my own research and learn more about all these things, and then actually take the actions, the concrete steps to becoming a Bitcoiner? And as simple as a question as that was, I didn't have a good answer to that. I had my own recommendations, right? I can tell people to go to River or go to Swan or go and get a Cold Card or a Trezor, or, here's a Lynn Alden article and here's a Robert Breedlove podcast or whatever. And everybody has this kind of bespoke list of stuff to help onboard people. But the penny kind of dropped there that wasn't sufficient. That doesn't work at scale. And that perhaps there was a problem here that many people would have that an actual product, a software product, could solve for. And so that got the wheels turning. And then the other thing that became immediately apparent to us is that this isn't something particularly new. The idea of building a platform that can help people on an objective basis reliably compare and choose different products and services in a niche or in an industry, this exists. This is out there. There are other examples, but it doesn't exist for Bitcoin. And it's a problem for Bitcoin. People need to trust what they use, where they put their money, where they stack their sats, where where they store their sats, and so on. And the industry is developing so quickly. New products are coming out all the time. Existing products are getting updated. There's some amazing work being done across the industry, whether it's Lightning wallets, hardware wallets, new on-ramps being created all the time. And, and so we wanted to, and we are building somewhere for people to see all that stuff and figure out what's right for them and on what basis. On the basis of both getting the right information about the products and services, but also crucially from hearing from other Bitcoiners who have done this stuff. The question is, how do we bridge this kind of trust deficit? If I'm trying to become a Bitcoiner for the first time, or if I am a Bitcoiner, even if I am an existing Bitcoiner, but I'm trying to, I want to buy a new wallet, or I want to change where I'm buying my Bitcoin. How do I bridge this kind of trust deficit that's been opened up to such a large degree by so much misinformation and unreliable information and bad actors? How do we bridge that trust deficit? Well, I think it's with real stories from real Bitcoiners sharing their experiences. And so Apollo is predicated on that. This is Bitcoiners sharing with other Bitcoiners what to use, why, what works, and hopefully just speeds up the process and makes it much easier for people to join the network.
It is definitely super valuable. I wish I had that back when I was going down the rabbit hole a couple years ago, because I definitely had sats on BlockFi for way longer than I should have, because I didn't even know. I wasn't comfortable with any hardware wallet, didn't know about multi-sig for the longest time. And then I hop on your guys' website and you get everything right there, just yelling at you right in your face. So, what took me...
Yeah, well, what's funny about BlockFi is, sorry to interrupt, but we had people reviewing BlockFi and leaving critical reviews, if not negative, about BlockFi, warning people that their Bitcoin was at risk before it blew up, right? And so this is, and you can get that information elsewhere, right? Yes, people were also sharing that on Twitter, but it's noisy, right? It's noisy, and it's hard to figure out who to trust. Yeah. And maybe just through bad luck, you're following the wrong people, or you ended up in the wrong echo chamber. So hopefully we can do a better job in the future of helping to educate people about what to use and what not to use too.
And the key word you said right there is trust. And the way you guys set up your system is no one's trusting even you. It's not like you are the one that picks like, oh, this is the review that goes to the top. It's the people, the consensus, using their hard-earned sats, and they could vote on these reviews that they support. So could you kind of explain how that works in Apollo with the Lightning?
Sure. Yeah, I will say that we're early with this, and we don't have the finished product. We don't have the final incentive model that gets all of this right. So there is still trust involved today. We have to. We have guidelines for reviewers and for reviews of products, which are subjective. I mean, we're transparent about what they are, but they are still our guidelines, right? We're trying to ensure that anybody that submits a review is offering a genuine, sincere, or reporting on a sincere experience. There are other ways to verify reviews too. We can actually verify them in partnership with companies if we have records of who are particular customers. Companies can also invite their customers directly, so we do know that those people are genuine reviewers. But it's a work in progress, but we're getting there. And the incentive model is interesting too for the reviewer. So you mentioned Sats and you mentioned Lightning. So what we are building is a platform where the best reviews, the highest quality reviews, the most helpful reviews will get elevated above others. Sats are a part of that experience, and they will be. What I don't think we'll do is just have a kind of raw ranking based on, let's say, how much a particular review has been zapped, because that can be gamed, right? And the distribution of these things is such that inevitably you'll have a bunch of reviews getting a meager amount of attention and zaps, and then someone will love one and give it 100, and zap it 100,000 zaps, which has happened. And so, is that 100,000 times better, or 100 times better than the 1,000 zapped review? Like this stuff can be a little bit messy. So I'm not sure that we're going to rank reviews on that basis, but for sure we will allow those transactions and those zaps to occur. And so what we trust that what we are very confident that will do is give the best contributors the ability to earn on the basis of how valuable their contribution is. Mm-hmm. And so the model here, the mental model is, if you buy something on Amazon, anything on Amazon, or it's a really popular product, right? If it's a book or anything else, and there have been thousands of people that have bought it and reviewed it, inevitably what you'll see is that there'll be one review or a couple of reviews at the top of the list that have been upvoted 10,000 times. They're just the best review, enormously helpful. And what does that mean? It means that the person who wrote that review has been instrumental in facilitating an enormous amount of economic activity. All of these purchases that have been made on the basis of reading this review. And we do know that reviews really matter. This much we can say with certainty. All of the polling and statistics show this. Reviews matter. People buy stuff on the basis of it. So, as I was saying, if you're this person who's, got the best review of the Bitcoin standard on Amazon and it's got 10,000 upvotes, right? You've created an enormous amount of value, but you've captured none of it. And so what Lightning transactions, microtransactions, zaps, whatever you want to call it, what that enables us to do is actually allow the people who create all this value to capture some of it too. And so, yes, they can earn Bitcoin, but also if we get the incentive model right, when we get it right, then it will do an even better job of elevating the best, most helpful content to the top.
Yeah, there's no doubt the incentives right now on traditional review platforms just aren't there. There's not. I rarely find myself writing a review unless I just truly love the product, because it takes time to actually write a paragraph that's good. So what do you think about the AI type spam aspect that it might be able to provide? Because like you said, say something has 10,000 upvotes on Amazon, in the future, in a couple years, maybe there's a technology that, how do you know those aren't bots? And maybe it comes at a cost of more KYC, a harder user experience, more difficult user experience through Amazon. But with Lightning, like you said, someone could zap 100,000 sats, but it comes with a physical cost. Is that enough to prevent massive spamming?
I think AI is potentially, I would describe it as an extinction level event for trust on the internet, at least when it comes to user generated content, right? There was a lot of fanfare over ChatGPT 4 in particular a few months ago, and some of that hype has perhaps simmered down, and I think the tsunami of AI written content and bots and all this stuff hasn't come yet, but it's a matter of time, right? This stuff is coming, and in very short order, unless there are serious walls put up, then any user generated content is going to be suspect. This is why Twitter is wanting to charge everybody $8 a month, and still struggling to keep bots from ruining the platform.
Yeah.
It's endemic. And so this is the threat that AI poses. Nothing is believable, nothing is trustworthy anywhere, unless you can get a couple of things right? One of them is potentially making it uneconomical for attacks to happen in the first place. You need to get the game theory right. This is something that Michael Saylor has talked about with Twitter. Why not have a very small SAT deposit that is required to be posted, that is forfeited, by, or at least even the imposition of that cost could make it uneconomical for people to spam, to spin up an infinite number of bot accounts and spam them.
Yeah.
So something like this. I would say there's two levels at which you want to attack the problem of trust. One is at the bottom, like how do we eliminate the worst actors, the bad actors, and then the other is up the top, like how do we incentivize the best behavior too. And so I think at the bottom of that distribution, imposing a cost is a potential solution, right? Just make people part with precious sats in some way. Now, that's easier said than done, right? Because who is going to give up sats just to post something somewhere? Well, that's when the top of the distribution becomes important too. How do we incentivize and reward the best behavior and the good actors? And so that's something that we're thinking very deeply about. The future of Apollo probably looks like somewhere where it's not free to post for everyone all the time. And maybe it's 1 sat or 10 sats or something that people might have to part ways with. But on the other hand, if you are a really valuable contributor, then you should be able to earn far more than that on the upside. And so if people can make that ROI calculation in their heads, which hopefully no one's having to calculate anything in their heads, that's too much friction. But if people can see that okay, there's a trade-off here, and if I contribute, I'll be rewarded for it, then maybe we can manage the spam problem, the AI problem at both ends of the distribution, as I said. But there's two problems here. One is, it's both perception and reality. There is perception of trustworthiness and then the reality of. And you can do everything right to, in a technical sense, of making sure that your platform has the right systems in place. But if people don't buy it, if they don't perceive it to be true, then it's all for naught. And so that's, more to come on that in the future. But it's both of these things. It's perception and reality.
It reminds me like an economics case study, like a game theory case study, and we'll see what plays out. But I do, before, I know we're running up on time, I do want to ask you one final question of, I've noticed from your story, it seems like you really value, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you are making a difference, and you strive to find places that you can make a difference and better the world and productive achievement type stuff, building and making things better. So to me, that's super successful in itself. And how do you think about how do you define success? And then how do you think about failure as well? And kind of what's a healthy way to approach those?
It's a really good question. How do I think about success? I think about my own success, and I think about the success of my family, and I think about the success of my friends, and then I think about the success of other people I care about, and then eventually I think about, the success of more abstract ideas, society, countries, economic systems, and it's in that order, right? And so everybody's going to have their own definition, but mine would be something like an expansion of energy, an expansion of activity, an expansion of influence, not in a superficial, like I'm an influencer type way, but I mean, I have, I suppose, an obligation, I think, a duty to maximize my potential or to realize my potential. And then in doing so, I should be able to positively impact all of those different layers that I spelt out. Family, friends, community, maybe society at the end of that chain. And so success is building out from that, building out in that fashion and exercising more will on the world in that way.
I love it. Well, I think that's a good spot to end it on. Thank you so much for your time and telling the world what you're doing there with Apollo, with your brother there running the company as well. And everyone go check out heyapollo.com. I'll have all the links in the show notes and the Twitter handles as well. So give them a follow. And thanks so much, Julian.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mike White Pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.